My wife stood up to her overbearing mother and chose me over family drama. Now, we're rebuilding on our own terms. I'm a 32-year-old guy. My wife and I have been married for 5 years, and for the most part, it's been great. It all started when my wife's parents invited us on a family vacation to Hawaii. I was hesitant at first, given my rocky relationship with my mother-in-law, but my wife convinced me it would be a chance to smooth things over. "Come on, babe," she said, her eyes pleading. "It'll be fun. Plus, maybe spending a week together will help Mom see how great you are." I should have known better, but I couldn't say no to those eyes. So I agreed, and we started planning for what was supposed to be a relaxing tropical getaway. Little did I know, it would turn into the vacation from hell before we even left the ground. The morning of our departure, we all met at the airport. My father-in-law was his usual jovial self, cracking jokes and talking about all the Mai Tais he planned to drink. My wife was practically bouncing with excitement, already dreaming of sun-soaked beaches. And then there was my mother-in-law, her lips pursed in a permanent frown as she looked me up and down like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "Did you remember to pack sunscreen?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "I know how delicate your skin is." I bit my tongue and nodded, reminding myself that this was just for a week. I could handle a week, right? Wrong. So wrong. As we waited to board our flight, my mother-in-law pulled my wife aside for what looked like an intense conversation. I tried not to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help overhearing snippets. "Are you sure about this? It's not too late to change your mind. You could do so much better." My blood began to boil, but I took deep breaths, telling myself to stay calm. It wasn't anything I hadn't heard before. But then, as we lined up to board, my mother-in-law dropped a bomb that would change everything. "You know," she said, loud enough for everyone around us to hear, "I've been thinking, this is supposed to be a family vacation. And well, you're not really family, are you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, stunned, as she continued. "I mean, sure, you're married to my daughter, but that doesn't make you one of us." "Not really. Maybe it would be better if you sat this one out. We can always reschedule for a real family trip later." I looked at my wife, expecting her to jump to my defense, but she just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, clearly torn between her husband and her mother. My father-in-law shuffled uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in studying his boarding pass. In that moment, something inside me snapped. 5 years of snide comments, backhanded compliments, and not-so-subtle digs came rushing to the surface. I tried to be the bigger person, to keep the peace for my wife's sake. But this was the last straw. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You're right, I'm not family. Not to you, at least. And I'm done pretending otherwise." I turned to my wife, my heart breaking at the conflict I saw in her eyes. "I love you," I told her, "but I can't do this anymore. I won't spend a week pretending everything's okay when it's clearly not. You have a choice to make, right here, right now. Are you with me, or with them?" The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother-in-law looked smug, clearly expecting her daughter to choose blood over marriage. My father-in-law looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. And my wife? She looked like she was about to be sick. For a long, terrible moment, I thought she was going to side with her parents. But then something in her eyes changed. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and said the words that would change everything. "I'm with you. Always." My mother-in-law's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious," she sputtered. "After everything we've done for you, you'd choose him over your own family?" "He is my family," my wife shot back, her voice steely. "And if you can't accept that, then maybe we're the ones who need to reevaluate this relationship." With that, she grabbed my hand in our carry-on bags. "Enjoy your vacation," she told her stunned parents. "We'll be taking our own." And just like that, we walked away. I could hear my mother-in-law's shrill voice behind us, demanding that we come back, threatening to cut us off if we didn't. But we didn't look back. We just kept walking, hand in hand, towards an uncertain future. As we left the airport, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. We had no plans, no hotel reservations, and no idea what we were going to do next. But we had each other, and in that moment, it felt like enough. So, I said, trying to inject some levity into the situation. Where to now, partner in crime? My wife laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. I don't know, she admitted, but anywhere's better than back there. We ended up renting a car and just driving. No destination in mind, just the open road ahead of us. It was liberating and terrifying all at once. As the miles rolled by, we talked. Really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. I'm sorry, my wife said at one point, her voice thick with emotion. I should have stood up to her years ago. I always hoped if I gave her enough time, she'd come around. I reached over and squeezed her hand. It's not your fault, I told her. She's your mom. It's natural to want her approval. Maybe, she sighed, but you're my husband. You should have been my priority all along. As we drove, our phones blew up with messages and missed calls. My father-in-law sounding confused and hurt. My wife's sister demanding to know what had happened. And of course, my mother-in-law, alternating between guilt trips and threats. We ignored them all, focusing instead on each other and the road ahead. We ended up at a small coastal town, the kind of place that seems frozen in time. We found a quaint little bed and breakfast and decided to stay for a few days. It wasn't Hawaii, but as we walked along the beach hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, it felt pretty damn close to paradise. Of course, reality had to intrude eventually. On our third day there, as we were having breakfast at a local diner, my wife's phone rang. It was her sister, and this time, she decided to answer. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough to piece together what was happening. Apparently, my in-laws had gone on to Hawaii without us. And surprise, surprise, my mother-in-law was making everyone miserable. She's been crying nonstop, my wife's sister was saying, her voice tinny through the speakerphone, saying how ungrateful you are, how you've broken her heart. Dad's barely speaking to her. It's a nightmare. I watched my wife's face carefully, looking for any sign of regret or second thoughts. But all I saw was resolve. That sounds awful, she said, her voice steady. But it's not our problem anymore, her sister sputtered in disbelief. Not your problem? She's our mother. Yes, she is, my wife agreed. And I love her. But I'm not going to let her dictate my life or my relationships anymore. If she wants to be part of our lives, she needs to accept that my husband is my family now. After she hung up, my wife looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Did I do the right thing? She asked, her voice small. I took her hand across the table. I think you did the only thing you could do, I told her. It's not about right or wrong. It's about setting boundaries and standing up for what you believe in. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I hope someday she'll understand. The rest of our impromptu vacation passed in a blur of small-town charm and quiet moments together. We hiked in nearby woods, tried our hand at surfing, with hilariously disastrous results, and spent long evenings talking about everything and nothing. As our time there drew to a close, we knew we had to face the music back home. We couldn't run forever, after all, but something had fundamentally shifted between us. We were stronger now, the united front against whatever the world, or my mother-in-law, might throw at us. The drive home was quieter than the drive out had been. We were both lost in our thoughts, I guess, wondering what kind of reception we'd get, wondering if bridges had been burned beyond repair. When we pulled into our driveway, we were surprised to see my father-in-law's car parked on the street. My wife and I exchanged a look. This was it. Time to face the consequences of our actions. We found them sitting on our front porch. My father-in-law looking tired and drawn. My mother-in-law with red-rimmed eyes and a scowl that could curdle milk. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was my father-in-law who broke the silence. We need to talk, he said, his voice gruff. All of us. Like adults. And so we did. We sat around our dining room table, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. My mother-in-law started in almost immediately. A litany of complaints and accusations. But this time, something was different. This time, my wife and I were united. Enough, my wife said, cutting her mother off mid-rant. We're not here to rehash old grievances. We're here to set new ground rules. What followed was one of the most difficult, painful, and ultimately necessary conversations of my life. We laid it all out. Years of resentment, misunderstandings, and hurt feelings on both sides. There were tears, mostly from my mother-in-law. Shouting again, mostly from my mother-in-law. And moments where I was sure someone was going to storm out. But we got through it. And at the end of it all, we reached an understanding. It wasn't perfect, and I knew we had a long road ahead of us. But it was a start. My mother-in-law agreed to try, really try, to accept me as part of the family. In return, we agreed to be more understanding of her feelings and to make more of an effort to include her in our lives. As they were leaving, my father-in-law pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I should have stepped in years ago, but I'm proud of you both for standing your ground. It's been a few months since then, and I'd like to say everything's been smooth sailing. But life isn't a fairy tale, and old habits die hard. My mother-in-law still makes the occasional cutting remark, and there are times when I have to bite my tongue to keep the peace. But things are better. We're all trying in our own ways. And more importantly, my wife and I are stronger than ever. We know now, without a doubt, that we can face anything as long as we're together." Last week, we got another invitation from my in-laws. This time it's for a long weekend at a nearby lake house. My wife looked at me, a question in her eyes. And you know what? I said yes. Because family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. It's about the people who stand by you, who fight for you, who choose you every single day. And I choose this. Messy, complicated, and all. So here's to family, the ones we're born with and the ones we create. May we always have the courage to stand up for what's right, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to know when to walk away and when to try again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. So please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.